This is one of those summers that just refuses to end. Now, obviously, this is still late August and early September. We're still going to be warm this time of year. Summer doesn't just immediately end in September. But I think a lot of us are ready for fall. I think we want to see fall already. Maybe some are still holding on to summer, and if you are, I'd love to hear your reasoning, but I think many of us just want fall already. But we're not going to see it anytime soon across much of Central and Eastern states. Now, across the West, I think you guys are going to be loving this pattern. It's going to be cool and wet for many areas across the West. But for many areas in Central and Eastern states, it's just not going to be very pleasant. We're going to see many days in the 90s, some areas in the hundreds, and many areas at least in the mid to upper 80s for most. Let's go and talk about it in this video. Alright, so here is the 500 millibar height anomaly, where you see higher heights and those sort of orange shaded colors. That is where we have more ridging, and where you see more dips in those height contours, and lower heights with more blue colors, that is more troughing. So generally you can associate these higher heights with more heat and these lower heights with more cool air. That is generally the idea. And as you go throughout time, the ridge that is parked over the southwestern states will move east, and that's because we have more troughing across the west. In fact, if we zoom out here across North America, you can see that troughing. These aren't big, huge troughs that we see in the wintertime, but they are these sort of late summer troughs that dig down from the Arctic and sort of bring in some cooler and wetter conditions across the western states. Meanwhile, that's pushing this ridge and that warmer air off towards the east. That is a horribly drawn arrow, goodness. And that is what's going to allow temperatures to rise across much of the plains, across the Great Lakes and Midwest, and pretty much the eastern East Mississippi region as a whole over the next few days. And that will continue for quite some time. Now, it's possible that by the second week of September, we could see that ridge move back to the west, that ridge sort of break down a little bit and move towards the west. But we still have that troughing across the western states, and as long as you see that troughing in the west, what we call a negative P&A pattern, that is the negative Pacific North American pattern, and that favors generally more troughing across western North America and the northeast Pacific. So that is why we're seeing more troughing in the west and why the east is warmer, and that will continue. As long as that pattern continues, it's going to continue to be warm across much of the central and eastern states. Now, maybe we do see more troughing try to build in the second weekend of September. This is September 10th. Maybe we see some pattern change come in around there, where we see a more negative NAO and AO. So that will bring in more troughing in the east if that does develop. But if it doesn't happen, we're going to continue to see more broad ridging across the south, more troughing across the west, and therefore more heat across the central and eastern states going into early to maybe even mid-September. So just how warm could it get for many areas? Just how hot it could get for some areas? Over the next couple days, it's going to be very hot across the southwestern states and still fairly hot across central plains. Now, right now, we're kind of in a cooler pattern across parts of the south and the Midwest. A lot of this is due to more repeated storms, increased storm coverage across the south and Midwest, and more troughing up here across the Great Lakes, across the Hudson Bay and Great Lakes. That's bringing some cooler air for a couple of days. Nights are cooler. Days are still hot from an area, especially across the south, but the nights have been cool. Nights have been here in the south where I live. Some nights have been in the 60s, and that's been a welcome change for the past few nights. That will continue for the next couple of nights, but the days are still relatively hot. But that will change. We're going to see more hot days return across central states, across the east as well, even across the east coast. Many areas are going to be in the 90s across the mid-Atlantic and southeast. Some areas across central plains are going to continue to be in the 100s. A lot cooler across the west relatively. I mean, it's still going to be quite hot, but not as hot as it has been. Where many areas have been, 110 plus across parts of California, Arizona, Nevada, going to be more like 100. So still hot, but not as extreme as it has been, especially over the past, month or so. It's been a very hot season for cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas and areas across parts of Eastern California. It's just been miserable. It's just not very fun, but they'll get a little bit of a break from that extreme heat. It's still going to be hot. It is still summer, but temperatures overall are going to be much cooler. Nights are going to be very cool across parts of the Northwest. Still, it's still summertime, but maybe a little bit sign of early fall for them across the West, while over here in the East, we are still baking. Many areas going to be in the 90s, where you see those sort of grays and whites. The temperatures in the 90s, and more of those pinks are going to be temperatures in the 100s. Now, how far north that heat goes, we'll have to see. I think many areas across the upper Midwest, Great Lakes, are going to sort of escape that heat. I think many areas are going to be more mild. That would be 70s and 80s. But still, areas across the Ohio Valley, the Missouri Valleys, Missouri River Valley, the Ohio Valley, going to remain quite hot. Many areas in the 90s. Now, that's not the hottest area we've seen all summer, thankfully. It's not going to be as hot as we've had with some of the heat waves earlier this season. That's the advantage of being in September. Is generally not as hot as it is early summer. In fact, it's generally a little bit drier as well. I'll take a look at dew points and kind of see where some of that moisture is. We can look at the deterministic output for this. Look at dew points. It's going to feel muggy for some days, but it's not going to be that really oppressive humidity that we've seen earlier in the season. Some areas going to see dew points in the 70s, and if we see enough moisture, I think we could see some round storms, and that could lower temperatures a little bit. But where it is hot, dew points in the 50s, maybe 60s, not all that miserable. So that's going to be one advantage to this sort of heat wave compared to some of the heat waves that we've seen earlier in the season. Now, yeah, this is still hot, undoubtedly still hot, but I don't think we're going to see heat indices, 110, 115, even 120. And the thing is, later in the season here, we're in meteorological fall at this point in time, is that days are shorter, so the duration of that heat is not as long-lived. We're not going to see, 9 hours of very hot temperatures. It may see close to the 5, maybe 6 hours. So not as prolonged as it is earlier in the summer. Still, that doesn't mean it's not going to be miserable for many areas, but not as extreme as it is earlier in the summertime. But still, a couple of days I think could be very hot, quite miserable, but again, not as long-lived, not as extreme as it is earlier in the summer. So I think now the question is, when are we going to see a break from this heat? When are we going to see some true fall set in? And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really have much of an answer. There really isn't a lot of hope on the extended guidance. We're looking at GFS extended. Not really much hope here. It does show some semblance of troughing across the Great Lakes, Eastern Canada, and Northeast. That could bring some more longer-term relief as we go into mid to late September. But many areas across the West, I think, is that ridge will eventually move back to the West. I think that is something that will happen maybe towards the second or third week of September. But will we actually see any troughing to bring in some noticeably cooler air across the East? That's hard to say. That may not come in until maybe late September or early October. The European extended still shows temperatures well above average for many areas across the Central and Eastern states. Now, the European is known for being quite warm in the long range, especially when the initial pattern is relatively warm. So I don't think temperatures are going to be well above average going into October. I think we will start to see some transition happen sometime late September and early October. Now remember, temperatures are generally on the decline. So average temperatures are on the decline from mid-August onwards. So whereas early in August, where temperatures, say your average temperature is 90 degrees, for example, 3 degrees above average will take you to, say, around 93. But where temperatures are averaging around the maybe low 80s for many areas, upper 70s, that 3 to 5 degree above average temperatures are going to put you still in the 80s. Not going to bring you into the hundreds in October. You would need a really serious heat wave to do that. And there's no signal of that right now, fortunately. But obviously, we're looking quite far out. We're not going to see these really shorter term events or these patterns to show up in the extended guidance. So personally, I do think the temperatures may be a little cooler than this, maybe leaning more near to maybe a little below average, especially for areas across Great Lakes and Northeast. Temperatures could remain above average for parts of the Central Plains and the Southeast. May not see much change in pattern for those areas, maybe even not till mid-October. But fall and winter will eventually arrive. If you are tired of the heat, they will eventually arrive. We will see cooler temps at some point, just maybe later than normal. It's not unusual to see a late fall, but it does look like that could be one of those years where it may take a while to really see that true crisp fall air. So if you're the type of person that likes pumpkin spice lattes and you really want that fall weather, you may not really get a chance to experience that until maybe sometime in October. September, I think, is going to be quite warm. Now, of course, that is different if you're across parts of the Midwest, maybe even across parts of the West. But for the South, the Central Plains, you're going to probably have to wait a little while. And as far as precip goes, we'll look at the overall 30-day precip. I think we will see precip below average. And we talked about this in our fall prediction. It looks like it's lining up very well for September. Precip below average. We'll just put this out to the 1st of October here. Precip below average across the South. Now, this doesn't mean we won't get rain, but we could see perhaps a drought beginning to develop in some areas across the Southeast, whereas we see more drought removal across parts of the West. Now, I do think that I drew a whale here. Look at that. Look at this nice little happy whale. I think we will see precip maybe closer to near average, maybe a little above average, at least for the first half of September across the Pacific Northwest. I don't think precip will be below average throughout the whole period. So maybe leaning below average as we go into October, especially if that ridge moves back off towards the west and stays there for a longer period of time. But if perhaps we see more troughing stay across the west, precip will be more near to a little above average for September. And of course, on top of that ridge, we will see precip more near to above average as we see those ridge rider events. We see more northwest flow develop, and that will bring more precip atop that ridge and also keep temps a little bit cooler. But across the Southeast, even across the Midwest, precip will likely lean below average for much of September. So my concern here is going to be drought. I do think we will see at least some change. Perhaps maybe into October. I don't think we're going to see precip that below average in October. It really depends on where that high pressure sets up. If it does retrograde back to the west and we see more troughing develop in the east, precip will come up across the south and east going into October. So that will favor more wet pattern going into October. And in October, for much of the south, is usually the driest month. We get out of that summertime precip pattern and we get into fall. And as we're transitioning into fall, we don't really see a lot of these troughs move in till later in fall, October, November. So it being drier in October is not unusual, but will it actually be below average? Like well below average? It's hard to say. I think depending on how the upper air pattern evolves, precip could be leaning more near average. But we'll see how things develop over the next few weeks and see how the guidance looks then and how things actually perform. But that'll do it for today's video. I thank you all for watching. Obviously, we haven't had a video in a few days because I've been dealing with technical issues and all that. But we should have more videos in the near future as we get into fall. Start talking about more weather and all of that. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.